There's a paradox in non-duality discussions that seems to cause some division among people. Some people suggest that you can't experience non-duality. And I was reading some comments in a video, and that was basically what they were saying. They said you can't experience non-duality, you can only be non-duality. And they went on to discuss the contradiction associated with experiencing non-duality, because to experience something there, that implies that there's a subject and then there's an object. And this is all true, but there is a paradox here. So there is a non-duality experience there, or an experience of oneness that can be had. And really they do seem to come in many different forms. I've never really had an experience that was just identical to another, although they can have a lot of similarities. But to get to this paradox, we have to understand that consciousness is an unfolding and emerging phenomenon. And this is critically important when we talk about experiencing non-duality. It is very difficult to put into words, but when our attention is focused, in meditation, when we're focusing, it's helpful to put the focus of our attention not on the objects in our consciousness, but to aim it at that which is not already manifest in our consciousness. What this allows consciousness to do is become a conduit of sorts. So it's letting everything in, and it's not trapping itself on a single thing. When beginners meditate, they will often have trouble getting fixated on their thoughts. So when a thought emerges, they fixate on that, and then they attach to it, and they realize that they've become attached to thinking again, and then they cycle back through this and continuously attaching to each thought that comes in. But the acquired trait in more advanced meditators is that they're able to aim their attention beyond the thoughts that are coming in. And so it's and the interesting thing is the thoughts are still there. You don't have to fixate on them for them to so that you can coexist with them. You coexist with the thoughts that are arriving, but you're still pointing your awareness at my ability to describe it kind of ends there. But in essence, what we're doing, because consciousness is it's an emergent thing. Because of that, we're sort of riding the crest of a rolling wave. And this is how, I don't know if that clarifies it, but this is how we can experience non-duality. So while fundamentally, it is true that, and I said this in my very first video, that if we were completely absorbed into being, there would be no subject and object, and there would be no one experiencing anything at all. And this does make sense, but it only really makes sense within the dualistic model, and that's perhaps where the paradox fundamentally lies. So, because of the emergent quality, it does take focus, but there is a non-dual experience of oneness that can be had, and it is literally impossible to describe with words. Perhaps in another video I could describe that, but for the purposes of this video, we'll stick to the paradox. So while being completely absorbed in being, in non-duality, we would think that there is no subject and object, or at least there is only subject and no object of perception. That makes sense. However, in practical terms, it doesn't matter in the slightest. So, if in mathematics there's this concept of an asymptote, and so what it is it's basically a range, it's a line on a graph, and it represents a range of basically infinite points along the graph, and it goes in one direction, an infinite way, it's a line, and an infinite direction, an infinite distance in the other direction. And basically, so what it means is that any curve that approaches the asymptote, it never touches the asymptote. You can get infinitely close to the asymptote, but the asymptote and the curve, or the line, they will never cross. But you can get infinitely close. And so, for all practical purposes, you can basically get exactly on the line in practical terms. Maybe you're not exactly there, but for all practical purposes, you can get on that line. And so I think that's a very similar, that's probably the best analogy that I can use to describe why though it is true in absolute terms that there is no experience of non-duality, at the same time, it doesn't matter, and there is an experience of non-duality, because we can get so close to it that it's undeniable. And in the same way, if that's a little bit too abstract, then think of it like a ball bearing that's been machined, and you want that ball bearing to be as perfectly spherical as possible. And you machine this ball bearing, you grind it down, you polish it, and you get it as smooth and perfect as possible. But it's not quite perfect. And that's sort of the same thing. However, again, even this is all based on the dualistic model. And there is yet even another element that I've been thinking about, and that is that when you approach non-duality, the best way to describe it is that there's an emerging identity that's essentially more present, and so it completely destroys all of your preconceptions of the present moment as it stands. And this is basically the expansion of consciousness that allows the non-dual oneness to be possible. So there is a perception of what already is, but because of the expansion of consciousness, there is more that arises in the same moment, and that is key. And so that's how the timeless dimension opens up. So we speak about these things in words, and they're fundamentally based in duality and the subject-object model. So we think about these things in duality, but ultimately we have to kind of contradict ourselves in a way. But I hope I was able to explain that in a way that makes sense. Fundamentally, I don't think that I'm not convinced of the ineffable, that there is a wall of ineffability. In my perception, our words literally, they pass from the void, are transiently passed through the realm of thinking and come out of our mouths. So, in a sense, the non-dual, the word is the non-dual in a sense. If we are focused and careful enough, we can describe our perceptions with pretty good clarity, and they can have power to transform and communicate. So there's no reason to resign ourselves to the ineffable. We can try our best to describe it nonetheless. And ultimately, the non-dual experience, it can be experienced. It's just probably not what you think it is.